The silence had been my prison for exactly 31 days. Then, on that Tuesday morning, while my wife Cordelia thought I was still sleeping, my hearing returned as suddenly as it had vanished. The first words I heard weren't, "Good morning," or, "How are you feeling?" Instead, I heard my 28-year-old daughter Evangeline whisper into her phone, "The old man can't hear us anymore, Mom. Now's our chance to move forward with the plan." I lay perfectly still in our king-sized bed, my heart hammering against my ribs as the full weight of those words hit me. What plan? The plan they'd been discussing while I couldn't hear them? Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. My name is Theodore Blackwood, and at 58 years old, I thought I knew my family. I'd been married to Cordelia for 30 years. We married when I was 28 and she was 24. We'd raised Evangeline from diapers to her master's degree, and built what I believed was a loving household based on trust and communication. The hearing loss had started gradually, missing conversations in restaurants, asking people to repeat themselves, eventually leading to the devastating diagnosis that the doctors said might be permanent. But what I didn't know then was that my hearing loss wasn't natural at all. My wife had been deliberately poisoning me. For 6 months, Cordelia had been adding small amounts of various substances to my food and coffee, medications she'd stolen from the veterinary clinic where she worked as an assistant. She had access to ototoxic drugs normally used to treat serious infections in animals, but these medications had a dangerous side effect when given to humans. They could destroy the delicate hair cells in the inner ear, causing sudden hearing loss. Cordelia had spent those 6 months slowly increasing the dosage of these ototoxic drugs in my morning coffee, watching and waiting for the desired effect. When my hearing finally disappeared completely, she'd stopped the poisoning and waited exactly 31 days before allowing my hearing to return naturally, timing it perfectly for their murder plan. But now, lying in bed on the morning my hearing had returned, I was about to discover that my month of silence had allowed my wife and daughter to reveal their true selves. And what I would learn over the next few days would shatter everything I thought I knew about the people I loved most. Evangeline's voice drifted up from the kitchen below. "He's got that life insurance policy worth $800,000, plus the house is paid off. The hardware store property downtown is worth at least $1.2 million if we sell to those developers. The business itself barely breaks even, but that land is prime real estate." My blood turned to ice. They were discussing my death like a business transaction. "Keep your voice down," Cordelia hissed. "Even if he can't hear, Mrs. Ashworth next door might be gardening." I remained motionless, barely breathing, as my wife and daughter continued their conversation below. Through our bedroom floor, their voices carried with crystal clarity. A cruel irony given that I'd spent a month in complete silence. "The timing has to be perfect," Cordelia continued. "We can't make it look suspicious. The hearing loss gives us the perfect cover story. Depression, isolation, maybe he just couldn't handle living in silence." Evangeline's laugh was cold, calculating. "You're thinking too small, Mom. Why wait for him to, naturally? We could speed things up. Make it look like an accident." My hands clenched the bedsheets so tightly my knuckles went white. My own daughter, the little girl I'd taught to ride a bicycle, walked down the aisle at her wedding just 3 years ago, consoled through her divorce last year, was casually discussing my murder. "The stairs," Cordelia mused. "He's been unsteady since the hearing loss. A fall down those hardwood stairs. Head trauma. It would be tragic but believable. Or medication overdose," Evangeline added. "You've been handling all his prescriptions since he can't hear the pharmacy instructions. An overdose would look like confusion, maybe even suicide from depression." I forced myself to breathe slowly, evenly, maintaining the illusion of sleep while my family planned my death in vivid detail. 30 years of marriage, 28 years of fatherhood, and this was what it had come to. 2 people I'd trusted with my life literally plotting to take it. "We need to be smart about this," Cordelia said.
"No rushing.
"No obvious changes in behavior. He can't suspect anything." "He won't," Evangeline replied confidently. "The old man's always been too trusting. Even when my marriage was falling apart and I needed money, he just handed over $50,000 without asking questions." He's never suspected that people might take advantage of his generosity. My mind reeled. The $50,000 I'd given Evangeline for her emergency legal fees during her divorce. Money I'd withdrawn from our retirement savings without hesitation because I'd believed my daughter was in crisis. Had that been a lie too? Had she been manipulating me even before my hearing loss? Remember, Cordelia's voice carried a warning tone. We maintain the loving wife and daughter routine, concerned, devoted, caring for poor deaf Theodore. The community needs to see us as the grieving family when the time comes. When the time comes. They were talking about my death with the casual planning of a vacation. I lay there, listening to my wife and daughter plot my murder, and realized that my month of silence had been a blessing in disguise. Without my hearing, I'd been unable to eavesdrop on their true feelings. Now that it had returned, I was getting an education in betrayal that no university could provide. I've already started setting the stage, Cordelia continued. Dr. Pemberton knows about his depression since the hearing loss. I've mentioned to the neighbors how withdrawn he's become, how he barely eats. When something happens, everyone will say they saw it coming. The methodical nature of their planning chilled me to the bone. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision driven by greed or desperation. This was a calculated campaign that had been building for weeks, maybe months. While I'd been struggling with my disability, learning to navigate a silent world, my family had been using my vulnerability to construct my death. What about the business? Evangeline asked. Blackwood's Hardware has been in the family for 3 generations. Are you sure you want to sell it? Cordelia's laugh was bitter. That dusty old store? Theodore pours every extra dollar back into maintaining that relic while we live like we're barely middle class. The building and land are worth far more than the business itself. We'll sell to those developers who've been sniffing around downtown. Turn it into another shopping complex. Blackwood's Hardware wasn't just a business. It was my father's legacy. My grandfather's dream brought to fruition in 1952. 3 generations of Blackwood men had built that store from nothing, serving our community, employing local families. The thought of it being demolished for a shopping complex made me physically sick. But it also revealed something crucial about Cordelia's character. In 30 years of marriage, she'd never once expressed dissatisfaction with the store. She'd attended every community event we'd hosted, smiled through every Chamber of Commerce dinner, played the supportive business owner's wife to perfection, all while secretly despising everything my family had built. Mom! Evangeline's voice dropped to an even more conspiratorial whisper. Are you really sure about this? I mean, it's Dad. He's not perfect, but he's not a bad man. For a moment, hope flickered in my chest. Maybe my daughter retained some small spark of conscience, some memory of the father who'd loved her unconditionally. Evangeline, Cordelia's tone grew sharp. Your father is a nice man, but nice doesn't pay for the life I want to live. I've spent 30 years in this small town, in this modest house, shopping at discount stores while he funnels every extra dollar back into that failing business. I'm 54 years old. I want to travel, live somewhere exciting, have money for nice things. Theodore's greatest value to me now is his life insurance policy. The casual cruelty of her words hit me like physical blows. 30 years of marriage reduced to an insurance payout. All those years of shared meals, quiet conversations, small intimacies. All of it had been performance art while she calculated my worth in dollars. Besides, Cordelia continued, what has he really given you? A childhood in this boring town, pressure to take over a business you never wanted, guilt when you made your own choices. You could have been living in New York or Los Angeles, pursuing your art, if you hadn't felt obligated to stay close to home. Evangeline had majored in fine arts with dreams of becoming a painter. After college, she'd moved to Chicago for 2 years before returning home when her marriage started falling apart. I'd assumed she'd come back because she missed family, missed the comfort of home. Now I realized she'd returned because she needed money, and I was the easiest source. You're right, Evangeline said, her voice gaining conviction. I've wasted too many years here. After it's over, I could finally move somewhere that matters. Start over with real money behind me. Start over. My death would be her fresh start. The kitchen fell quiet for several minutes. I could hear the coffee maker gurgling, the familiar sounds of morning routine that had become precious to me during my month of silence. Normal sounds hiding an abnormal conversation about ending my life. How long do you think we should wait? Evangeline asked finally. I need to start adding anxiety medication to his routine, Cordelia replied. Since I stopped the hearing damage drugs yesterday, his hearing should start coming back gradually over the next week. But if I begin increasing his anxiety medication now, by the time he can hear conversations clearly, he'll be too confused and unsteady to understand what he's hearing. My blood ran cold as I understood the full scope of her plan. Cordelia had been poisoning me for months, had caused my hearing loss deliberately, and was now planning to drug me into confusion before I could fully recover and discover their plot. She'd been controlling my health, my disability, my very perception of reality, all while planning my death. I heard chairs scraping against the kitchen floor. They were getting ready to start their day, to come upstairs and check on their victim. I closed my eyes tightly and forced my breathing into the deep, regular rhythm of sleep. Footsteps on the stairs. Cordelia's voice, artificially bright and loving. Theodore? Honey? Are you awake? I've made your favorite breakfast. I kept my eyes closed, maintained my sleeping posture. Let them think their secret was still safe. The bedroom door opened quietly. I felt Cordelia's presence beside the bed, probably checking to make sure I was still unconscious. Her hand touched my forehead gently, the gesture of a caring wife checking on her disabled husband. Poor baby, she whispered, her voice full of fake sympathy. This has been so hard on you. If only she knew that the hardest part wasn't the hearing loss. It was learning that the woman I'd loved for 3 decades was capable of planning my murder with the same attention to detail she'd once used to plan our anniversary dinners. She left the room quietly, probably returning to the kitchen to continue plotting with Evangeline. I remained still for another 20 minutes, listening to their muffled conversation below, catching fragments of their continued planning. My mind raced through the implications of what I'd learned. Cordelia and Evangeline weren't just discussing a hypothetical future. They were actively planning my death. The anxiety medication she planned to start giving me today, the timeline they'd discussed, this was happening within a week. I needed help, but who could I trust? The police would need evidence beyond my word, and how could I explain that I'd been eavesdropping on conversations they thought I couldn't hear? If I revealed that my hearing had returned, they might accelerate their timeline or simply change their method. No, I needed to be smarter than that. I needed to gather evidence, document their plans, maybe even record their conversations. I had to play dead man walking until I could build a case that would protect me and expose them. But first, I had to get through today without revealing that I could hear every word they said. The irony wasn't lost on me. For a month, I'd felt isolated and helpless because of my hearing loss. Now, my returned hearing was making me feel more isolated and helpless than ever before. I could hear my family, but what I was hearing was a plot to kill me. I opened my eyes and sat up slowly, rubbing my face as if waking naturally. Time to begin the most important performance of my life. Pretending to be the same trusting, vulnerable man I'd been yesterday, while secretly gathering evidence to expose the people who wanted me dead. Cordelia appeared in the doorway almost immediately, carrying a breakfast tray with a bright smile that now looked sinister rather than loving. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said, her lips moving in the exaggerated way she'd adopted since my hearing loss. "I made your favorite blueberry pancakes and coffee." I nodded and smiled, signing thank you in the basic sign language we'd been learning together. What a touching couple we must have appeared to be. The devoted wife caring for her disabled husband, both of us learning new ways to communicate. If only the neighbors could hear what we'd really been communicating about. As Cordelia set the tray on my lap, I caught her eyes studying my face carefully, probably looking for any sign that I'd overheard their kitchen conversation. I kept my expression neutral, grateful, the face of a man who still trusted his family completely. She handed me a small paper cup with my morning medications, pills that now included anxiety medication she planned to use to confuse me. I pretended to swallow them, actually holding them in my cheek, then took a large sip of orange juice to supposedly wash them down while secretly transferring the pills to my mouth. When I smiled and nodded my thanks, I was careful to keep my mouth slightly closed. "Evangeline's going to drive you to your doctor's appointment this afternoon," Cordelia said, speaking slowly and clearly. "Dr. Pemberton wants to check on your progress." Dr. Pemberton, who apparently knew about my depression and had no idea that my hearing loss had been deliberately caused. I wondered how much of my psychological evaluation had been influenced by Cordelia's reports of my condition. I nodded and signed, "Okay," then pointed to my coffee and made a gesture of appreciation. But I had no intention of drinking that coffee. If Cordelia had only stopped the ototoxic drugs yesterday, there might still be residue, and I couldn't risk any setback in my hearing recovery. When Cordelia turned to adjust the curtains, I quickly spit the pills into my napkin, then pretended to cough and held the napkin to my mouth, concealing the evidence. Evangeline appeared in the doorway, dressed for work in the professional attire she wore to her job at Meridian Insurance Company, where she worked as a claims processor. "Morning, Dad," she said with a bright smile. "Sleep well." I could barely look at her. 12 hours ago, she'd been the daughter I worried about, the child I wanted to help rebuild her life after her divorce. Now she was a stranger who'd casually discussed the best methods for murdering me. I signed "Good morning" and gave her what I hoped looked like a loving father's smile. She moved closer to the bed, leaning down to kiss my forehead, the gesture of a devoted daughter caring for her disabled father. "I took the day off work today so I can spend time with you," she said. "Maybe we can get ice cream after the doctor, like when I was little." The reference to our childhood tradition felt like a knife twist. How many of those memories had been genuine? How much of our relationship had been real? And how much had been her playing the role of loving daughter while calculating how to benefit from my death? After they both left the room, Cordelia to get ready for her shift at Westfield Veterinary Clinic, Evangeline to supposedly run errands before driving me to the doctor. I immediately went to the bathroom and flushed the pills I'd hidden in my napkin. I also poured the coffee down the sink and refilled the cup with water, in case either of them checked. I sat in our empty house for a few hours, trying to process the magnitude of what I'd discovered. The silence that had tormented me for a month suddenly felt like a blessing. At least when I couldn't hear, I'd been spared the knowledge of how little my life meant to the people I loved most. I walked through our house with new eyes, seeing everything differently. The family photos on the mantelpiece were Cordelia and Evangeline smiling genuinely or performing for the camera. The kitchen where we'd shared thousands of meals. Had Cordelia been secretly resenting every moment spent cooking for a man she planned to kill? In my home office, I sat at the computer and began researching. If Cordelia and Evangeline were planning to kill me, I needed to understand exactly how they might do it. The medications they'd been giving me, the insurance policies they'd mentioned, the legal implications of their plan. What I discovered was terrifying. Cordelia had been right about the life insurance. $800,000 with her as the primary beneficiary. The house was indeed paid off and worth about $400,000 in our small town's market. Blackwood's Hardware, while the business operations barely broke even, was sitting on downtown property valued at over $1 million by recent commercial real estate assessments. Total value of my death to my family, approximately $2.2 million. For the first time, I understood the mathematical equation that had reduced my life to numbers on a spreadsheet. Cordelia could live very comfortably on $2.2 million, especially if she left our small town for somewhere with a lower cost of living. Evangeline could start over anywhere she wanted with that kind of money backing her. But understanding their motivation didn't help me figure out how to stop them. I spent the morning researching recording devices and surveillance equipment. Based on what I'd overheard, they seemed most comfortable discussing their plans in the kitchen when they thought I was asleep upstairs, and possibly in the living room during evening conversations. I'd need to place recording devices in those specific locations where they felt safe to plot. By noon, I had a plan. It would be risky, requiring me to act quickly, but it was my only chance to gather the evidence I'd need to expose them. When Evangeline returned at 1:30 to drive me to my doctor's appointment, I was ready with my performance. I appeared slightly more confused than usual, moving slowly as if the new anxiety medication was beginning to affect me. "How are you feeling, Dad?" she asked as we got in her car. I made exaggerated gestures indicating dizziness and confusion, then shrugged as if accepting this new symptom. Evangeline watched me carefully, probably calculating how quickly the medication was working. "Maybe we should mention this to Dr. Pemberton," she said with false concern. During the drive, she chattered about taking time off work to spend with me, maintaining the loving daughter performance while secretly monitoring my condition for signs that I was becoming sufficiently impaired for their plan. Dr. Pemberton's examination was routine, checking my ears, reviewing my medications, asking about my mood and adaptation to the hearing loss. Cordelia had apparently briefed him well on my depression, because he spent considerable time discussing my emotional state. "How has his mood been since starting the anxiety medication?" he asked Evangeline, speaking about me as if I weren't in the room. "He seems a bit more confused today," Evangeline replied with practiced concern. "More unsteady, slower to respond when we're talking to him. Is that normal?" I hadn't been confused or slow to respond, but Evangeline was creating fictional symptoms to match their timeline, making it seem like the medication was having the desired effect even though I wasn't actually taking it. "Those can be side effects of anti-anxiety medication, especially in older patients," Dr. Pemberton said sympathetically. "We'll monitor his response. If the symptoms worsen, we may need to adjust the dosage." "What should we watch for?" Evangeline asked, playing the concerned daughter perfectly. "Increased confusion, balance problems, memory issues," Dr. Pemberton explained. "In extreme cases, patients can become disoriented enough to have accidents. Falls, that sort of thing." Perfect information for Evangeline to use in planning my accidental death. She was gathering medical backing for their murder plot right from my own doctor. As we left the medical complex, Evangeline suggested we skip the ice cream tradition. "You seem tired, Dad. I should get you home to rest." During the drive home, I began to understand the full scope of their deception. They weren't just planning my death, they were actively creating a medical and social narrative that would support their story. Evangeline was establishing fictional symptoms with my doctor. Cordelia was discussing my condition with neighbors. They were building a case history that would make my eventual death look predictable and natural. When we arrived home, Cordelia was already in the kitchen, starting dinner early since she'd taken the afternoon off from the veterinary clinic. The sight of her moving around our kitchen with familiar efficiency struck me as particularly cruel. How many meals had she prepared while secretly planning my death? How many cups of coffee had she poisoned? "How did the appointment go?" she asked Evangeline, speaking normally since they thought I couldn't hear. "Perfect," Evangeline replied. Dr. Pemberton confirmed that the anxiety medication can cause confusion and balance problems. He said patients can become disoriented enough to have accidents. "Dad's already showing symptoms." Cordelia nodded approvingly. "Excellent. I'll continue increasing the dosage gradually. In a few more days, he should be confused enough for our plan to work, but not so obviously impaired that anyone gets suspicious." A few more days. They'd given me a specific timeline for my own murder. That evening, they maintained their performance of the loving, concerned family. Cordelia helped me with my medications, which I continued to palm and later dispose of in the bathroom. Evangeline discussed her day using exaggerated facial expressions and basic sign language. To anyone watching, we were a family adapting beautifully to a challenging situation. But I could hear every word of their whispered conversations when they thought I was out of earshot. Plans for increasing my medication. Discussions about the best timing for my accident. Speculation about how quickly they could sell the business and house after my death. That night, lying in bed beside Cordelia, I listened to her breathing and wondered how long she'd been planning this. Had she been thinking about my death for years, waiting for the right opportunity? Or had the idea developed gradually as she grew more resentful of our life together? I thought about our early years together, the excitement of young marriage, the joy when Evangeline was born, the pride we'd shared as I'd built the hardware store into a successful community business. Had any of it been real for her? The most painful realization was that I'd been a good husband and father. I'd provided well for my family, been faithful, supportive, present for every important moment in Evangeline's life. My death wasn't about revenge for mistreatment or abuse. It was simply about money. I'd loved them completely, and they valued me only for my life insurance policy. Around midnight, Cordelia slipped out of bed, probably thinking I was asleep. I heard her moving quietly downstairs, then the soft sound of her voice talking on the phone, with the speaker volume turned up high enough that I could hear both sides clearly. "It's me," she whispered. "Yes, everything's going according to plan. I started the anxiety medication today, and he's already showing signs of confusion. Dr. Pemberton confirmed the medication can cause disorientation and accidents. Maybe 3 more days. I want to make sure he's sufficiently impaired." "Yes." Evangeline's fully committed. "And you're sure he can't hear you?" a man's voice asked through the phone. "Positive." His hearing loss was complete. Even if it's starting to return slightly, the anxiety medication will keep him too confused to understand what he's hearing. "Good. I've made all the arrangements on my end. The insurance investigation will be minimal once you file the claim." My blood ran cold as I realized there was a third person involved in planning my death. Someone with the power to influence insurance investigations. I strained to hear more of the conversation, and what I learned next made everything even worse. "I can't wait for this to be over," the man continued. "Once Theodore's dead and the insurance money comes through, we can finally be together without hiding." "I know, darling," Cordelia whispered. 30 years of marriage will finally be over. I'm so tired of pretending to love him." Cordelia was having an affair. This wasn't just about money. It was about Cordelia wanting to start a new life with her lover, funded by my death. "Has Evangeline spoken to you recently?" Cordelia asked. "She called me this afternoon after the doctor's appointment. Everything's proceeding perfectly. In 3 days, she'll help create the accident, and I'll make sure the insurance claim is processed quickly with minimal investigation." 3 days. I had 72 hours to live. After about 10 minutes, Cordelia returned to bed, settling in beside me as if nothing had happened. I lay awake for hours, my mind racing through possibilities. Who was the third conspirator? Someone with power over insurance investigations, probably someone high up in an insurance company, possibly even the company that held my life insurance policy. The next morning brought new horrors. During breakfast, Evangeline mentioned casually that she'd been researching my hearing condition online. "Did you know that people with sudden hearing loss have significantly higher rates of depression and suicide?" she said to Cordelia, speaking as if I couldn't hear them. "Especially men Dad's age. The isolation and hopelessness can be overwhelming." Cordelia nodded thoughtfully. "That's so tragic. I hope Theodore isn't thinking about anything like that." They were building the suicide narrative, creating a paper trail of research and concern that would support their story after my death. "Maybe we should secure his medications," Evangeline suggested. "Make sure he can't accidentally take too much if he gets confused." "Good thinking," Cordelia agreed. "Though we don't want to make it obvious we're worried about suicide. That might hurt his self-esteem and make things worse." The casual way they discussed my fictional suicidal tendencies while sitting at our breakfast table was breathtaking. They were rewriting my personality, my mental state, my entire character to fit their murder plot. I spent that day planning my own survival. While they were both at work, Cordelia at the veterinary clinic, Evangeline at the insurance company, I drove to an electronics store in the next town over and paid cash for small recording devices. The sales clerk, a young man named Tyler, helped me select voice-activated equipment with 72-hour battery life. I purchased extra batteries and learned how to change them quickly and quietly. "Home security?" he asked. "Something like that," I replied. I returned home and carefully installed the tiny devices in the kitchen, living room, and near the phone in our bedroom, places where Cordelia and Evangeline seemed most comfortable discussing their plans. The devices were virtually invisible, tucked behind picture frames and under furniture. I also used my computer to research James Morrison, a defense attorney in the next town over who specialized in criminal cases. If I was going to expose my family's murder plot, I'd need legal representation. That evening, Cordelia made my favorite dinner, pot roast with vegetables, served with wine. She handed me my evening medications with a smile, a larger dose than Dr. Pemberton had originally prescribed. "Doctor's orders," she said sweetly. I went through my usual routine of pretending to swallow the pills, then disposing of them in the bathroom. But when I returned to the dining room, I overheard another whispered conversation between Cordelia and Evangeline. "He should be ready by Saturday night," Cordelia was saying. 3 days of increased medication should make him confused and unsteady enough for the plan to work. "And Donovan will be there to help stage everything?" Evangeline asked. Donovan. Now I had a name for their co-conspirator. "He'll come in through the back door after it happens," Cordelia confirmed. "He has a key. He'll make sure everything looks right before we call 911. So their accomplice had a key to our house. When had he made that? How long had this conspiracy been developing? What about the insurance investigation?" Evangeline asked. "Donovan's already arranged everything. As senior claims adjuster for Meridian Insurance, he can expedite the claim and minimize any investigation. With his professional recommendation that it was clearly an accidental death, the payout will be processed within 2 weeks. Meridian Insurance, the same company where Evangeline worked. That's how they'd met their co-conspirator. Someone with the power to influence my life insurance claim was working with my family to murder me. I went to bed that night knowing I had less than 48 hours to save my own life. Friday morning, I put my plan into action. I called James Morrison's law office and scheduled an emergency meeting for that afternoon, telling his secretary it was a matter of life and death, which was literally true. When Cordelia and Evangeline left for work, I retrieved the recording devices and downloaded hours of incriminating conversations onto my computer. Their voices, clear and unmistakable, discussing every detail of how they planned to kill me. Morrison's law office was small but professional. When I played the recordings and explained my situation, his face went through a series of expressions from disbelief to horror to professional determination. "Mr. Blackwood," he said after listening to several conversations, "this is attempted murder. We need to contact the police immediately." "I will," I replied, "but I need to know they'll be arrested before they can carry out their plan tomorrow night. If they're released on bail or if there's any delay, they might try to kill me tonight instead of waiting." Morrison nodded grimly. "The evidence you've gathered is substantial. Let me make some calls." Within 2 hours, Morrison had coordinated with Detective Sarah Rodriguez and the district attorney's office. They would arrest Cordelia, Evangeline, and Donovan Saturday evening, but they wanted to catch them in the act to ensure the strongest possible case. "We'll have officers stationed around your house," Detective Rodriguez explained during our meeting. "You'll be wearing a wire Saturday evening to capture their final planning conversation and the beginning of their murder attempt. The moment they start to implement their plan, giving you the overdose of medication, creating the opportunity for your accident, we'll move in." "What about this Donovan character?" I asked. "Donovan Ashworth, senior claims adjuster at Meridian Insurance," Rodriguez confirmed. "We've been investigating him for insurance fraud in other cases. This will finally give us enough evidence to arrest him. We'll take him into custody when he arrives at your house with his key." It was terrifying but necessary. I had to let them get close enough to almost kill me to ensure their convictions would stick. Saturday morning arrived gray and overcast, matching my mood. This was the day my family planned to murder me, and I had to play along until the police could intervene. Cordelia was unusually cheerful at breakfast, humming while she made coffee and chatting about plans for a quiet evening at home. Her good mood made sense. By Sunday morning, she'd be a widow with a $2.2 million inheritance and free to start a new life with Donovan. Evangeline arrived around noon, having taken another day off work to spend with me. She brought groceries for what would supposedly be my last meal. The afternoon crawled by with agonizing slowness. I knew police officers were positioned around our house, New Detective Rodriguez was monitoring the wire I wore under my shirt, but I still felt utterly alone with two people who wanted me dead. Around 5 o'clock, Cordelia announced she was making a special dinner. My favorite meal of steaks and roasted vegetables, served with the expensive wine we usually saved for special occasions. "We wanted to have a nice family evening," she said, her hands moving in the exaggerated sign language that now felt like mockery. "Just the three of us. Just the three of us, two murderers and their victim." As Cordelia cooked, I caught Evangeline checking her phone repeatedly, probably coordinating with Donovan to confirm timing for the evening's events. Dinner was served at 7 o'clock sharp. Cordelia had used our best china, lit candles, made everything look festive and celebratory. The irony was nauseating. They were celebrating my last meal. "A toast," Cordelia said, raising her wine glass, "to family and to new beginnings." New beginnings, like her new life with Donovan, funded by my death. I raised my glass and smiled, playing my role as the trusting husband and father. I took only the smallest sips of wine, just enough to wet my lips for appearance's sake. As we ate, I noticed both women watching me carefully every time I lifted my glass. They were monitoring my alcohol consumption, calculating my level of impairment for their plan. After dinner, Cordelia brought out dessert, my favorite chocolate cake with coffee. She handed me my evening pills with a bright smile. "Doctor's orders," she said sweetly. "This should help you sleep well tonight." This time, there were significantly more pills than usual, enough anti-anxiety medication to render me unconscious, possibly permanently. I went through my practiced routine of pretending to swallow them while actually holding them in my cheek. When I excused myself to use the bathroom, I spit the pills into my hand and examined them under the light. There were at least 3 times the normal dosage, enough to cause respiratory depression when combined with alcohol. I flushed the pills and returned to the dining room, where Cordelia and Evangeline were having a quiet conversation. "He took all the pills without question," Evangeline was saying. "How long before they take effect?" "About an hour," Cordelia replied. "Combined with the wine, he should be unconscious within 90 minutes. That's when Donovan will come in through the back door." They were finalizing the details of my murder over coffee and cake. At 9 o'clock, Cordelia suggested we move to the upstairs television room to watch a movie. "It'll be more comfortable," she said, "and we can spend quality family time together." We settled into the upstairs family room, with me in the recliner positioned perfectly near the top of the staircase. They'd chosen a long movie, something that would give the supposed medication time to work while establishing their alibi of being together when I became confused and disoriented. As the movie played, I pretended to grow drowsy, letting my eyes droop and my head nod slightly. Both women watched me carefully, probably calculating whether the medication was taking effect as planned. "Look how sleepy he's getting," Evangeline whispered to Cordelia during a loud scene. "The medication is really working." "Perfect," Cordelia whispered back. "Another 30 minutes and he'll be ready to be murdered." At 10:30, I heard a soft sound from downstairs, the back door opening quietly. Donovan had arrived with his key, exactly as planned. My heart rate spiked, but I forced myself to maintain the appearance of drug-induced drowsiness. Cordelia stood up and stretched. "I think I'll get ready for bed," she announced loudly enough for any surveillance equipment to pick up. "Theodore, do you want to come down and take your nighttime medication before you go to sleep?" This was it. The moment they'd been planning for months. Cordelia was creating the opportunity for me to go downstairs while supposedly impaired, where they'd arrange for my accidental fall with Donovan's help. I stood up slowly, swaying dramatically as if the medication and wine had severely affected my balance. Both women watched me intently, probably judging whether I was sufficiently impaired for their plan to work. "Let me help you down the stairs, Dad," Evangeline said, standing up quickly. "I don't want you to fall." The audacity was breathtaking. She was offering to help me down the stairs so she could push me to my death. "That's very thoughtful, sweetheart," I said, making my voice noticeably slurred as if the medication was affecting my speech. Just need my reading glasses from downstairs. Evangeline moved to my side, taking my arm in what would look like a supportive gesture to any observer. But I could feel the tension in her grip, the way she was positioning herself to control my movement down the stairs. Cordelia followed behind us, and I could sense both women's nervous energy. This was the moment they'd been planning for months. My murder was finally about to happen. As we reached the top of the stairs, I made a show of stumbling slightly, catching myself on the banister. Evangeline's grip tightened on my arm. "Careful, Dad," she said with false concern. "Maybe you should sit down for a minute." No, I'm fine," I mumbled, continuing toward the stairs. "Just need my glasses." I took the first step down, then the second. Evangeline was beside me, her hand moving to my back now, positioned perfectly to give me a helpful push when we reached the steepest part of the staircase. Cordelia was 3 steps behind us, probably ready to act as witness to my tragic accident. We were halfway down when I saw Donovan Ashworth emerge from the kitchen. A tall, thin man in his 40s wearing latex gloves and carrying what looked like a small medical bag. He was probably there to help stage the scene after my fall, maybe inject me with something to ensure death if the fall itself wasn't fatal. "Dad, are you feeling dizzy?" Evangeline asked, her voice full of fake worry, while her hand pressed more firmly against my back. This was the moment. I could feel her muscles tensing, preparing to shove me down the remaining stairs. Her grip shifted from supportive to controlling. "Police! Nobody move!" The front door exploded open and Detective Rodriguez burst in with 4 officers, guns drawn. Evangeline's hand jerked away from my back so quickly she nearly lost her own balance. "Hands where we can see them!" Cordelia screamed from behind us, a sound of genuine shock and terror that was very different from the grief performance she'd been rehearsing. Donovan dropped his medical bag and raised his hands, his face going white as he realized their plan had been discovered. "What's happening?" Evangeline stammered, her face going pale. I straightened up, no longer playing the role of impaired victim, and looked directly into my daughter's eyes. "I can hear every word you've been saying," I said clearly, my voice strong and steady. "My hearing returned 3 days ago, and I've been recording your conversations." The color drained completely from Evangeline's face. "Dad, I don't understand. You, your mother, and Donovan have been planning to murder me for my life insurance money," I continued, loud enough for the police officers to hear. "I have recordings of your conversations, including tonight's plan to drug me and push me down these stairs." Cordelia collapsed onto the stairs behind us, her legs giving out as the full scope of their exposure hit her. "Theodore, please," she gasped. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I replied. "You've been poisoning me for 6 months to cause my hearing loss. You plan to drug me tonight with lethal doses of anxiety medication and make my death look like an accident caused by depression and confusion." Detective Rodriguez approached us carefully, her weapon still drawn. "Evangeline Blackwood, Cordelia Blackwood, and Donovan Ashworth, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder and attempted murder." As the officers moved in to handcuff my wife, daughter, and their accomplice, Evangeline made one last desperate attempt at manipulation. "Dad, we were just talking," she said, tears streaming down her face. "We never actually planned to hurt you. We love you." I pulled out my phone and played one of the recordings I'd captured. Evangeline's voice, clear and unmistakable, discussing the specific details of how they planned to make my death look accidental. "He should be ready by Saturday night," her recorded voice said. 3 days of increased medication should make him confused and unsteady enough for the plan to work." Her shoulders sagged in defeat as she heard her own words played back to her. Donovan was already being handcuffed by Officer Martinez. In his medical bag, they found syringes and a vial of succinylcholine, a paralytic drug that would have made it impossible for me to survive the fall, ensuring that what looked like an accident would definitely be fatal. "You have the right to remain silent," Officer Rodriguez said as she handcuffed Cordelia. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." I sat down heavily on the stairs, watching my family and their accomplice being arrested for planning my murder. The relief was overwhelming, But so was the grief. These weren't strangers who'd threatened me. They were the people I'd loved most in the world. "Mr. Blackwood?" Detective Rodriguez said gently. "Are you all right? Do you need medical attention?" I shook my head. "I'm fine. Just processing all of this." "We'll need you to come to the station to give a formal statement," she continued. "But we have enough evidence from your recordings and what we witnessed tonight to hold them without bail." As Cordelia, Evangeline, and Donovan were led out of our house in handcuffs, Cordelia turned back to look at me one last time. "Theodore," she called out desperately, 30 years of marriage has to count for something." I looked at the woman I'd shared 3 decades of my life with, the mother of my child, and felt nothing but sadness. "It did count for something," I replied quietly. "It counted for $800,000 in life insurance and a plan to kill me." The police cars pulled away, taking my family to jail. I stood alone in the house that had been the scene of their planned murder, listening to the silence that had once tormented me but now felt like peace. The next few days were a whirlwind of legal proceedings, media attention, and revelations that made the situation even worse than I'd initially realized. The investigation revealed that this conspiracy had been developing for over a year. Donovan Ashworth had been researching my financial situation through his position at Meridian Insurance, the same company that held my life insurance policy. He'd identified me as a wealthy target and had been watching our family, looking for the right opportunity to orchestrate a profitable murder. The affair between Donovan and Cordelia had started 8 months ago when she'd called Meridian Insurance with questions about my policy coverage. Donovan had used that initial contact to begin a relationship with her, gradually convincing her that she deserved a better life than what I could provide. Evangeline's involvement had begun more recently, about 3 months ago when Donovan had approached her at work, revealing his relationship with her mother and proposing that they all work together to access my insurance money. The promise of $2.2 million split 3 ways, plus the chance for Evangeline to start over with financial freedom, had been enough to convince her to join their plot. The most sickening detail was the systematic nature of their approach. Donovan had coached Cordelia on how to poison me gradually, starting with substances that might cause a natural-looking heart attack or stroke. When those attempts didn't work quickly enough, he'd suggested the ototoxic drugs as a way to make me more vulnerable and isolated through hearing loss. The hearing loss itself had been perfectly timed. Cordelia had been increasing the dosage of ototoxic drugs for 2 months until my hearing was completely gone, then stopped them so my hearing would return naturally over the following weeks, but slowly enough that they could complete their murder plan before I could overhear their conversations. Even my recovery had been part of their calculated timeline. They'd planned for me to gradually regain my hearing while being kept confused by anxiety medication, ensuring that even if I could hear again, I'd be too impaired to understand or remember what I was hearing. The depth of their deception was staggering. They'd been systematically manipulating my health, my mental state, and my perception of reality for months, all while maintaining the facade of loving family members concerned about my well-being. The trial began 10 months later. By then, I'd sold Blackwood's hardware to a young family who promised to maintain its character as a community business. I couldn't bear to keep working in the store after learning that Cordelia and Evangeline had seen it as nothing more than valuable real estate to be liquidated for shopping complex development. I'd also sold our house and moved to a small apartment across town. The memories of 30 years of marriage were forever tainted by the knowledge that Cordelia had been planning my death while sleeping beside me every night. Cordelia, Evangeline, and Donovan were all charged with conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, aggravated assault, for the systematic poisoning, and insurance fraud. The evidence was overwhelming. Not just my recordings, but financial records showing Donovan's research into my policies, medical records documenting the deliberate poisoning, digital communications between the 3 conspirators, and physical evidence including the lethal drugs found in Donovan's possession. Cordelia's defense attorney tried to argue that she'd been manipulated by Donovan, that she was a victim of his scheme rather than a willing participant. But the recordings clearly showed her taking an active leadership role in planning the details of my murder and personally administering the poisons over many months. Evangeline's lawyer attempted an insanity defense, claiming that the stress of her recent divorce had caused a mental breakdown that impaired her judgment. The prosecution countered with evidence that she'd been researching my life insurance policies and discussing my death long before her marriage ended, and that her participation had been calculated and methodical rather than impulsive. Donovan simply pleaded guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence, admitting that he'd orchestrated the entire plan and recruited Cordelia and Evangeline to carry it out. His testimony revealed even more disturbing details about their conspiracy, including backup plans they prepared if the staged fall hadn't worked. During the trial, more horrifying details emerged about their relationship dynamics. Cordelia testified that she'd been unhappy in our marriage for over a decade, staying only because she felt financially dependent on me. She'd discussed leaving several times, but Donovan had convinced her that my death would provide her with more money and freedom than divorce could ever offer. I felt trapped in a life I never wanted, she said during her testimony. Theodore was a good provider, but he was content with a small-town life that felt like a prison to me. Donovan showed me that there was another way to get the life I deserved. Evangeline's testimony was the most painful to hear. She admitted that she'd never really wanted to return home after her divorce. She'd only come back because she needed money and saw an opportunity to inherit rather than asking for help. I thought of it as a business decision, she said during cross-examination, her voice flat and emotionless. Dad was 58 years old and would die eventually anyway. We were just accelerating the timeline for everyone's benefit. The casual way she discussed planning my murder was chilling. My own daughter had reduced my life to a financial calculation, weighing the benefits of my death against the inconvenience of waiting for natural causes. The most devastating revelation came when the prosecution presented evidence of backup plans. If the staged fall hadn't worked, they'd prepared to cause a car accident by tampering with my brake lines. If that failed, Donovan had access to drugs that would cause an untraceable heart attack. They'd even discussed the possibility of staging a home invasion robbery gone wrong. They weren't planning a single murder attempt. They were prepared to keep trying different methods until one succeeded. This was not a crime of passion or desperation, the prosecutor told the jury during closing arguments. This was a cold, calculated conspiracy to murder a loving husband and father for money. The defendants spent nearly a year planning different ways to kill Theodore Blackwood, systematically poisoning him and manipulating his health while maintaining the facade of concerned family members. Cordelia received life in prison without the possibility of parole for first-degree murder conspiracy and aggravated assault. At 54, she would spend the rest of her life behind bars. Evangeline received 35 years for conspiracy to commit murder and attempted murder, with the possibility of parole after 25 years. She would be in her 50s when released if she ever was. Donovan received 40 years for his role as the mastermind, his longer sentence reflecting both his leadership in the conspiracy and his abuse of his professional position to facilitate insurance fraud. As a repeat offender with previous fraud convictions, he was unlikely to ever see freedom again. After the trial, I had to rebuild my entire life. The hardest part was losing my faith in my own judgment. How had I lived with these people for decades without seeing their true natures? How had I missed the signs that my wife was capable of systematic murder? Dr. Pemberton, who had unknowingly been used as part of their plan, referred me to a therapist who specialized in trauma from domestic abuse and betrayal. It took months of counseling to accept that I hadn't been naive or stupid. I'd been the victim of sophisticated manipulation by people who were skilled at long-term deception. The therapist helped me understand that Cordelia and Evangeline had been performing their roles as loving family members for years, possibly decades. Their behavior toward me had been carefully calculated to maintain my trust while they planned to benefit from my death. Psychopaths and sociopaths are often very good at mimicking normal emotions, Dr. Sarachin explained during one of our sessions. They can perform love, concern, and devotion so convincingly that even mental health professionals can be fooled. You weren't deceived because you were gullible. You were deceived because they were exceptionally skilled manipulators. Learning that my wife and daughter likely had personality disorders that prevented them from forming genuine emotional attachments was somehow both devastating and relieving. It meant that our relationships had been built on lies, but it also meant that their betrayal wasn't a reflection of my worth as a husband and father. 6 months after the trial, I received an unexpected visitor. Evangeline's ex-husband, David, contacted me through my lawyer and asked if we could meet. We had coffee at a small cafe downtown, neutral territory where neither of us had painful memories. "Mr. Blackwood," he said, his hands shaking slightly as he held his coffee cup, "I owe you an apology." "You don't owe me anything, David," I replied. "Evangeline's actions aren't your responsibility." "But they are, in a way," he continued. "I knew something was fundamentally wrong with her long before our divorce. The lying, the manipulation, the way she could turn emotions on and off like a switch. I should have warned you." David spent the next hour describing his marriage to Evangeline. Years of financial manipulation, emotional abuse, and calculated deception that had nearly destroyed his mental health. "She convinced me I was losing my mind," he said. "She'd move things around the house and then act concerned when I couldn't find them. She'd tell me I'd said things I knew I'd never said. By the end, I was seeing a psychiatrist because I thought I was having a breakdown." The behavior he described was textbook gaslighting, psychological manipulation designed to make the victim question their own sanity and memory. "Evangeline learned those techniques from Cordelia," David continued. "I met Cordelia many times during our marriage, and she was exactly the same way. Cold, calculating, but perfectly charming when she needed to be." "Why didn't you ever say anything?" I asked. David's face crumpled with guilt. "Because who would believe me? Evangeline was your perfect daughter, and Cordelia was your perfect wife. If I'd tried to tell you that your family was manipulating you, you'd have thought I was just a bitter ex-husband trying to cause trouble." He was absolutely right. If David had approached me before my hearing loss and told me that Evangeline and Cordelia were dangerous, I would have dismissed him as someone trying to get revenge against his ex-wife. "The divorce was my escape," David said. "But I should have found a way to warn you."
I'm sorry.
Our conversation helped me understand that I hadn't been Cordelia and Evangeline's first victim. David had suffered years of the same type of manipulation I'd experienced. The difference was that he'd escaped through divorce, while they'd planned for me to escape through death. 2 years after the trial, I made a decision that surprised everyone, including myself. I decided to visit Evangeline in prison. The drive to the women's correctional facility took 2 hours, giving me plenty of time to question my decision. What did I hope to accomplish? Was I looking for closure, answers, or some sign that my daughter retained some capacity for genuine remorse? The visiting room was sterile and depressing. Plastic chairs, fluorescent lighting, and the constant presence of guards. Evangeline appeared after a few minutes, wearing a standard orange jumpsuit, her hair pulled back simply. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by her surroundings and the weight of her crimes. "Dad," she said quietly, sitting across from me at the small table. "I wasn't sure you'd ever want to see me again." "I wasn't sure either," I admitted. "But I needed to ask you some questions." For the first time since my hearing had returned, we had a completely honest conversation. Evangeline, with nothing left to lose and facing decades in prison, finally told me the truth about our relationship. "I never hated you," she said, tears streaming down her face. "But I never really loved you either. Not the way a daughter should love her father." The admission was like a physical blow, but I'd prepared myself to hear difficult truths. "When did it start?" I asked. "The planning, the thinking about my death?" "About 3 months before we actually tried to kill you," she replied. "When Donovan approached me at work and told me about his relationship with Mom. He showed me how much money you were worth dead versus alive, and I started thinking about how different my life could be if you weren't around." "And your mother?" Evangeline was quiet for a long moment. "Mom's been unhappy for as long as I can remember. She stayed with you because it was easier than leaving, but she never really wanted the life you gave her. When Donovan showed her that there was another way to get the money and freedom she wanted. Did you ever feel guilty about what you planned to do to me?" I asked. Evangeline looked directly into my eyes for the first time during our conversation. "I feel guilt about getting caught," she said honestly. "I feel guilt about the life I've lost, the future I've ruined. But about planning to kill you? I honestly don't know if I'm capable of feeling guilty about that." Her honesty was terrifying but somehow appreciated. After years of lies and manipulation, she was finally telling me exactly who she was. The prison psychiatrist says I have antisocial personality disorder, she continued. I don't form emotional attachments the way normal people do. I never have. What about when you were little? I asked. The pictures, the breakfast in bed, the Father's Day cards? Performance, she said simply. I learned early that acting like a loving daughter got me what I wanted. It was easier than actually feeling love. I sat in that prison visiting room, looking at the young woman I'd raised from birth, and realized I was talking to a stranger. The daughter I'd thought I knew had never really existed. I'm sorry, Dad, Evangeline said as our time was ending. Not for planning to kill you, because I can't make myself feel sorry about that. But I'm sorry that you had to learn what kind of person I really am. I left the prison feeling oddly relieved. For months, I'd been torturing myself with questions about what I'd done wrong as a father, how I'd failed to instill better values in my daughter. Learning that Evangeline was likely born with a personality disorder that prevented her from forming normal emotional bonds was somehow liberating. I hadn't failed as a father. I'd been raising a child who was fundamentally incapable of the love and loyalty I'd tried to teach her. 3 years after the trial, I made another major life change. I decided to remarry. Helen Morrison was James Morrison's law partner, the attorney who'd helped me navigate the legal complexities of my family's betrayal. She was a widow in her E. Our relationship developed slowly, built on genuine compatibility rather than passionate romance. After my experience with Cordelia's decades-long deception, I valued authenticity above all else. Helen had lost her first husband to cancer 5 years earlier, so she understood grief and the process of rebuilding a life after devastating loss. She also understood that my situation was different. I was grieving the loss of people who were still alive but had never really existed. You're not mourning the death of your wife and daughter, she observed during one of our early conversations. You're mourning the discovery that they were never who you thought they were. Helen brought her own wisdom to our relationship. Having watched her husband die slowly from illness, she understood the value of time and honest communication. She had no patience for games or manipulation, which made her the perfect partner for someone who'd been victimized by years of deception. We married in a small ceremony with just a few close friends, people who'd supported me through the trial and its aftermath. It felt strange to be happy again, but Helen helped me understand that surviving my family's betrayal didn't mean I had to live the rest of my life in fear and isolation. The best revenge against people who tried to steal your life, she said, is to live it fully. Today, 5 years after my hearing returned and I discovered my family's plan to kill me, I live a quiet but fulfilling life with Helen. We travel, volunteer at local charities, and enjoy the simple pleasure of honest communication. I've learned to trust again, but I've also learned to trust wisely. Helen and I talk openly about our finances, our expectations, our fears and hopes for the future. There are no secrets between us because we both understand the danger of hidden agendas. The hardware store is thriving under its new owners, who've maintained its character while modernizing its inventory. I stop by occasionally to chat with customers who remember me, and it brings me joy to see that my family's legacy of community service has survived despite the actions of people who bore our name. Evangeline will be eligible for parole in 20 more years, when she's in her late 40s. I've decided that if she contacts me when she's released, I'll meet with her, but I won't have a relationship with her. She's demonstrated that she's incapable of the emotional connections that make family relationships meaningful.
Cordelia will die in prison.
At her age and with her sentence, she has no hope of release. I feel sad about that, not because I want a relationship with her, but because it represents the waste of a human life that could have been meaningful if she'd made different choices. The most important lesson I've learned is that love requires authenticity. For 30 years, I thought I was living in a loving marriage and enjoying a close relationship with my daughter. The reality was that I was performing love for people who were incapable of returning it genuinely. With Helen, I have something I never had with Cordelia: a partnership based on mutual respect, honest communication, and genuine affection. We chose each other with full knowledge of our histories, our flaws, and our expectations for the future. I've also learned that survival isn't just about staying alive. It's about building a life worth living after you've survived. My family's betrayal could have destroyed my ability to trust, love, or find joy. Instead, it taught me to value authenticity and to appreciate relationships built on truth rather than manipulation. The hearing loss that started this nightmare turned out to be a blessing in disguise. If I'd never lost my hearing, I would never have overheard their conversations. I would have died believing that my wife and daughter loved me, never knowing that they'd seen me only as a source of money. My restored hearing saved my life in more ways than one. It saved me from physical death, but it also saved me from living a lie. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder what would have happened if I told Cordelia and Evangeline that my hearing had returned as soon as I realized it. Would they have abandoned their plan? Would we have found a way to repair our relationships? But I know the answer. People who are capable of systematically poisoning their father and husband for months, who can plan multiple murder attempts with clinical precision, aren't capable of the genuine change that would have been required to save our family. The conversations I overheard revealed their true characters, and those characters were fundamentally incompatible with healthy relationships. I'm 63 years old now, and I've learned that it's never too late to start over. The life I'm building with Helen is small but authentic. We have Sunday dinners with friends who've known about our histories from the beginning. We volunteer at the local literacy center, teaching adults to read. We take long walks where we talk about everything and nothing. It's not the life I planned when I was 28 and marrying Cordelia, full of dreams about growing old together and watching our children build their own families. But it's a good life, built on truth rather than illusion. The silence that once terrified me has become something I treasure. In the quiet moments with Helen, I hear honesty, contentment, and genuine affection. The absence of hidden agendas and secret plans is its own form of music. I've kept all the recordings of Cordelia and Evangeline's conversations, though I rarely listen to them anymore. They serve as a reminder of how thoroughly I can be deceived when I want to believe in love that doesn't really exist. But they also serve as a reminder of my own strength. I survived not just the attempted murder, but the complete destruction of my understanding of my own life. I rebuilt from nothing, and what I've built is stronger because it's based on truth. If you're listening to this story and questioning whether the people you love are genuine in their affection, trust your instincts. Real love doesn't require perfect relationships, but it does require authenticity. People who truly care about you will be honest about their feelings, their needs, and their intentions. And if you discover that the people closest to you are capable of betrayal on the scale I experienced, remember that survival is possible. You can rebuild, you can learn to trust again, and you can create relationships based on truth rather than manipulation. My hearing loss taught me to value silence. My family's betrayal taught me to value honesty. My survival taught me that it's never too late to build a life worth living. Today is Saturday, and Helen and I are planning to visit the farmer's market, then spend the afternoon working in our garden. Simple pleasures, honest companionship, and the kind of quiet contentment that can only come from relationships built on truth. 5 years ago, I was lying in bed listening to my wife and daughter plan my murder. Today, I'm planning which tomatoes to plant and whether we need more herbs for Helen's cooking. It's a good life. Not the life I expected, but a life I've chosen consciously, with full knowledge of what real love looks like and what it doesn't. My hearing returned that Tuesday morning 5 years ago, but in many ways, I didn't really start listening until I heard the truth about the people I thought I knew. Now, every conversation with Helen is a gift, not because it's perfect, but because it's honest. And that makes all the difference in the world. If you found this story compelling, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more incredible true stories of survival and resilience. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever discovered that someone close to you wasn't who you thought they were? How did you rebuild trust after betrayal? Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in our next video.